Hey everyone, this is DeagleBeagle, and today I'm going to go over the most underrated moves in VGC Series 2, but also Series 1. So let's go through them. Psyshock, I'm going to make a video about Psyshock versus Psychic after tomorrow's tournament because sometimes I kind of want to keep some information not on the internet so people don't use something that will counter me. But anyway, Psyshock is pretty underrated, even though Psychic a lot of the times is better. In fact, most of the time it is better. But in those cases where Psyshock is better, it gives you a huge niche over using Psychic. Now, low kick and other weight-based moves like heavy slam, but not grass, not grass. There's too many light Pokemon that are weak to grass, so not grass knot, but low kick and heavy slam. There might be some others that I'm thinking over I am overlooking, but I think those are the main ones. Low kick and heavy slam are pretty good if you have high weight, that is, for heavy slam. Now feint is also really underrated. I've almost never seen it, but I've been using it with Mousehold Fluttermane, and it works really well at just a priority move in general in any Pokemon. Like even a quick attack or a Ice Shard or Shadow Sneak is good to finish off sashes or Pokemon with low HP. And it goes through their Protect too if they use it. So it's really not bad, and it breaks up Wide Guard as well. So I really think Feint is underrated. And then Encore, that move, it's underrated and overrated at the same time. It's like it depends on how you use it. Like if you assume that they're not going to switch and you just Encore, you just brainlessly click buttons, that probably won't work that well because they could just switch out after they use a vulnerable move like Fake Out because they don't want to get Encored. So, but it's good for at least the bluff and kind of having that option if you really need to force a switch. It can be good, but I wouldn't say it's that underrated because of that fact that they can just switch out. So the next one is disable. You can kind of disable their move and force them to have to switch out, especially if you encore them, make them struggle. And then another one is screen breaking moves like Psychic Fangs, Raging Bull, and Brick Break. There might be another move that breaks screen that I'm blanking out on, but I think those are the main ones. Screens can be really good unless you break them. Now, sometimes it's not convenient to use Brick Break, especially when they can just set up the screens again. So normally you should kill their screens Pokemon first, but if you can kill their screens Pokemon fast enough, you might not even need Brick Break because you probably put them in a pretty bad position. That's why I've been using Fluttermane with Specs for the Grimmsnarl and just Pokemon in general. So I'm like, even if they get up screens, like they probably only got up one screen, and then I can just use either physical or special, whatever is the opposite of what screen they got up, to finish them off, or just do enough damage where the screens won't even make a big enough difference. But it's still pretty underrated, even though it's not that underrated because screens aren't super common, but they're becoming more common. It's just nice to have that peace of mind knowing you're not going to lose to screens. Close Combat Arcanine. Sorry, I don't know what I'm doing with gum. I'll eat it later. Close Combat Arcanine. That could have pretty good coverage versus Tyranitar and stuff, even though it could just Terra Flying or Protect or whatever. But at least it gives you some offensive coverage. I wouldn't say it's that good though. It's alright. It's not great. Okay, but it still is underrated. Helping Hand is really underrated. That has like extremely high priority, and you can just outspeed their Fake Out even or priority and just do 50% more. I mean, just that 50% more might be enough to finish off their Pokemon outspeed and finish off their Pokemon before they can even hit you. So Helping Hand's just been really underrated. Like I've been doing excellent with it with Mousehold or Farig in the past with Iron Hand's lead. Okay, so Terra Blast on some mons is underrated but overrated on others. I would say certain mons really use Terra Blast well offensively, like Terra Blast Psychic Tyranitar, Terra Blast Fire, Roaring Moon. Some Pokemon where Terra Blast may not be that good. It just depends on your typing. Like if and it depends on how often you Terra. For example, Terra Blast on a Garganacl would be probably bad because it's not offensive probably to be worth a slot unless maybe you're using it offensively because it does have decent attack. It depends on how you're using it too. Like even if you're using it differently from the traditional one, it may not be bad. Even though it may be odd, it may not be bad. So it's just a case by case basis. And then Fling King's Rock, that is pretty underrated. There's not a lot of Pokemon where you can do that with though, or make it really worth it, but possibly on Screamtail or a few other Pokemon. Perhaps, maybe even Mousehold actually. No, actually, probably not because it gets Follow Me. Some fast Pokemon that gets Fling King's Rock with King's Rock, where you don't really need the item that much. Maybe more of a supportive mon, probably like Screamtail is what I'm thinking of. Weevol's kind of not that bulky for it. But I mean, it doesn't need to be that bulky, I guess, if you flinch him. As long as you flinch the right one. Okay, Fake Tears is pretty useful, but it's mostly useful for mons that get either a Prankster Fake Tears or they get really high speed so that they outspeed your ally before it uses a special attack and you can actually use it on the same turn. Otherwise, it's half a waste. And then screens, they're pretty good even though they can be broken, but most people don't have a way to break screens, so it's pretty reliable. But I don't know if you should necessarily focus your whole team around it. If you do, you might want some Pokemon immune to, like, that's partly why people use Gastrodon, I think, on the Grimmsnarl teams is for Raging Bull. And then they can have Terra Ghost for the Brick Break, or just Ghost Mons in general in the back to wall Brick Break. And or you could use Sableye or Dragapult to set up screens, and it's already immune to Fake Out. So then if you protect with your ally or have a Ghost Mon, then it won't break the screens. And then Perish Song without Trap. If you use Perish Song like in the back when they only have 2 left, it can be really good. I was doing amazing with the Azumarill and winning a lot of battles I otherwise would have lost if I didn't have Perish Song. So that's probably the best way to use it. It's too hard usually to trap a team in unless they're just really passive. Avalanche, it does have what, like -4 priority, but it can have up to 120 power. I believe it works like Revenge, except it's ice type and it has pretty good coverage. So you could use it with like Assault Vest Gyarados, or even you could use it with Dondozo just to have good coverage. And then Blizzard with snow. I don't mean Obama snow. I mean with the snow up. The snow weather, I should say. To not get it confused with Obama snow. But Obama snow likely should be the one setting up the snow. And you can use Blizzard with like Iron Bundle, and I was doing really well with it. Endeavor with certain mons like Lycanroc. Now, Lycanroc is probably the best Endeavor user in the game because it is immune to damaging weather and it gets Endeavor and it doesn't have that much else to do besides Endeavor and Rock Slide and stuff. So recommend that move on Lycanroc. Now it's really fast too. Now Roar, Dragon Tail, and Whirlwind, that may not have a lot of use, but if they start using Bulk Up or something to boost their stats, you might want to get them out of there. but it's not. Is it really underrated? No, it's not really underrated. It's just a slightly underrated. Breaking Swipe is pretty good. It's a good spread move and lowers attack. Like Roaring Moon or something would be great at it, and especially since it has low defense to help boost its defense in a sense by lowering their attack, the opponent's attack. Now, Manual Weather. So, for example, that could be Rain Dance, Sunny Day, Sandstorm, etc. That is pretty useful. I know because I used Murkrow with Goldango, and I could set up a manual Rain Dance, or I even used it with Sylveon to help it use Terra Blast Water more strongly to counter other weather teams, etc. So it's just pretty good, even though it's nice to have Pelipper. But if you don't have room for a Mon like Weathermon, then you might want to just run a manual Weather, especially with the Prankster Mon like Murkrow, because usually you have a free 4 slot anyways. Outrage. Outrage does a lot of damage. And if they use redirection anyways, it'll hit that Pokemon for a lot of power. The main issue with Outrage though is you can't Terrastall mid Outrage. So before you Outrage, you need to be sure that you probably won't need to Terrastall in the middle of the Outrage turns. But it has a lot more damage output, and even hitting a random foe with Outrage isn't a problem if they're both neutral or weak to Outrage. But if one is immune to it, you may not want to risk it. Unless you're pretty sure you can kill that Pokemon with your ally faster than you can use Outrage with your slower ally. So maybe Outrage in that sense is better on a slower Pokemon. It typically is better on a slower Pokemon. Sleep Talk is useful potentially versus Sleep, but I wouldn't say it's that overrated, just slightly. If you use Rest, it could be pretty good. In fact, I need to do an update video maybe on Ursaring, or talk about if it's good for Series 2 or not. I think it would actually be pretty good for Series 2. Rest Talk, Double Edge, and high horsepower. It has a lot of bulk and offense. Now, Chilling Water. Dondozo could even use Chilling Water because it harshly raises its special attack from Tatsugiri, and it could lower the opponent's attack to keep it alive. Just an idea that I have never really seen that, but to me that might be even better than Wave Crash. Yes, you have less damage, but if you use Rest with Chilling Water with Dondozo, you can keep restoring your HP, lowering their attack, and keep dishing out damage and keep it alive like forever. But if you can't keep it alive like forever, then maybe it's not worth it. Chilling Water is also good with Pokemon that don't have an accurate, powerful water move. Like Iron Bundle, it might be decent with, but it also gets Water Pulse. Usually though, you probably should just risk Hydro Pump. But if you can find a team where you really use the Chilling Water to your advantage, then maybe you could use it. It's probably best though with mons that don't need to hit really hard offensively and probably aren't that fast. More like Gastrodon or something. Okay, Shadow Ball, Dragapult. Dragapult, I feel like everyone's using Dragapult wrong. At least in Series 1 and 2, I suppose, yeah. But the Specs one it was really good in Series 1. I was like the only one using it because I was like, Phantom Force is really overrated, and it taking 2 turns to hit them is just stupid. So I'm like, I'm just gonna make it Specs, and it could one-shot Goldango. Back then, nobody was really using Terrastall that much with Goldango. They would, at least when there was no team preview, I guess they didn't expect Shadow Ball, so I'd just be Spec Shadow Balling them. But it's underrated anyways. Multi-hit moves with loaded dice like Scale Shot. So, loaded dice I should say some multi-hit moves. Okay, because generally that's not true. Because let's just take even Baxcalibur where it's pretty decent on. If you use loaded dice with Icicle Spear, it's like it's either gonna have 100 or 125 power, and you have to use a whole item for that when you could have just used like Life Orb with Icicle Crash or something, even though that could miss and not hit as often and not go through sub and sash and whatnot. It's still, I don't know, it's like loaded dice. You can't rely on it hitting 5 times, even though it does hit 5 times half of the time, to be fair. So it's not useless, but it's just something you can't really rely on to hit as hard as you want it to hit. So it's not that consistent. But if you're fine with it just hitting 4 times, then maybe. But hitting, like I said, hitting 4 times though, that's barely. That would be like not even worth it if it hits 4 times. So it's kind of a luck-based item. I wish it would just hit 5 times all the time. And then Roost or other recovery moves in general are underrated. There's certain Pokemon like Fleshinder that actually have a niche only because it has Roost with decent bulk and Eviolite. And then Draco Meter on Mons that are traditionally physical. Oh, that's like Dragapult. So some Pokemon that are dragon have decent special and physical attacks, so Dracometer would be pretty good. And then Fire Spin, I've seen it with Dragonite, but Flesh Ender something might use it well too. Lots of mons get it. So maybe instead of Will-O-Wisp, I might try out Fire Spin, but Will-O-Wisp helps keeps Flesh Ender alive with Roost, so I'll probably keep Will-O-Wisp, but I would like to test with some Pokemon Fire Spin. Bulky Mons like Assault Vest Multi-Scale Dragonite would be pretty good for Fire Spin because it actually traps them in and does damage for like I think around 5 turns. So that's really good. That's like a mean look plus damage. And then I think even if you switch out, they're still stuck in there, but it can miss. So I don't know. Whirlpool, same thing as Fire Spin, pretty much, except it's water. And then Icy Wind with mons that don't normally get it, that don't normally run it. Like Icy Wind, for example, Pelipper might be pretty decent. Icy Wind, like anything almost, can be pretty decent. Icy Wind's just a really good move. Spread move and hits through redirection and lowering their speed, and you can use it more than one time to keep lowering it. And then Facade isn't that underrated, but with all the Will-O-Wisp going around, you can kind of use it to get a power boost off of them trying to wisp you, or just bluff it so they don't wisp you, and have both Facade and a higher power like normal move or something. And then Terra Fire to stop burn. That's pretty underrated. You see that a lot now, actually. Not just to resist, let's say, Fairy with Annihilate, but you use it to prevent being burned. Everyone knew that with Annihilate, but I mean, with the new Pokemon, like, or anything really, even Gallade or something, but also the new Pokemon like Great Tusk are commonly running Terra Fire to not get burned, which is really smart. And then just relying on Defiant or whatever allies for the rest to deter, intimidate, and whatnot. So that's a pretty good idea. And then Terra Grass, I used 2 Terra Grass Pokemon actually on my team that won the Durance tournament. So Terra Grass is good for stopping Spore and going through Rage Powder. It is talked about a lot and used a decent amount, but I still think it's a little underrated. And then Quick Guard, that's somewhat underrated, but if they see that in team preview, it's probably worse because they're just gonna probably not fake you out if they think you have Quick Guard and outspeed them. And then Ally Switch could be pretty useful. I'm actually surprised no one uses Ally Switch anymore. I guess part of it is on principle, but it feels like in this game, rather than years in the past, you don't have room for ally switch. Like you need to do so many other things, like have offensive coverage or set up trick room or whatever. You don't have time to be ally switching. So it's probably why it isn't used anymore, because it's a different type of metagame. And then Calm Mind, basically all the moves that raise your offense or bulk or both are pretty underrated. Like a Calm Mind Sylveon could do pretty well. Destiny Bond could do pretty well sometimes to force them to not attack you unless they want to lose a Pokemon. Especially if you have low HP, a fast Pokemon with Destiny Bond. Let's see, I think Flutter Mane actually gets it. Does Flutter Mane get it? Destiny, let's see who gets Destiny Bond. Flutter Mane does not get it. Wow. So the fastest Destiny Bond user is Iron Valiant? The problem with Destiny Bond though is if you're using it with open team sheets, they will be more careful. But if you're using it in closed team sheets like on ladder, it would be a lot better. Like a random Destiny Bond would be crazy because nobody really expects that. And then, where was I? Life Dew. There's certain Pokemon that would be good with Life Dew. I know I was using Goodra. So the ones with high bulk, Goodra, but Goodra being weak to Fairy when that's very common in Series 2, I wouldn't really recommend. So actually maybe it's not underrated. Yeah, I mean it's underrated on Goodra, maybe a little bit with good, but that's about it. Okay, Sword Dance can be pretty useful to set up, especially with like Iron Hands or whatever, especially if you have the speed control. So setting up on them if they protect is really nice. And then tricking a choice or other item onto the opponent could be really useful. Like even Goldango could, because I've seen the Scarf ones and they run trick, some of them, and they outspeed like Flutter Mane, so it could be pretty good with a trick with a choice item, like trick on a Trick Roomer to force them to switch out or something. And then Iron Defense, Body Press. That hasn't seen use for a while, so people aren't really preparing for it anymore. And it could be pretty useful. Like, imagine somebody using that with Garganical when everyone expects the Wide Guard Protect Salt Cure Recover set. They might be really screwed over by that because they weren't expecting you to use an offensive Garganical like that. And then Curse, the non-ghost one, is like a bulk up but lower speed. That could be useful for Trick Room. Let's look at the good Curse users that are low speed already. Or low speed and high attack is what you would want. So Copper Oddjaw would be good with Curse. It's a pretty decent Pokemon in Trick Room, especially with Sheer Force and Rock Slide and whatnot. And then Copper Oddjaw, Dondozo? I'm trying to think. Dondozo. I would have to test it out with Dondozo. With Unaware, it would still boost. Yeah, it would still boost your bulk. Yeah, I got to test it out with Dondozo. Especially with Dondozo, Copper. I'm more thinking about a Trick Room, a hard Trick Room team for Curse. Hippowdon, etc. So, yeah, Tyranitar too. And then, where was I? Skill Swap, that could be pretty useful against, how many more do I have? I got all of these, dang. Skill Swap It could be really useful against a few Pokemon, mostly Dondozo, to get rid of Unaware. That helps keep it alive, and if you get rid of that, then it may be screwed. Psychic can be good sometimes, especially versus Dondozo, like right before you kill it, Psychic, Mirror type of stuff. But actually, Mirror doesn't count for this video because these are moves, not items. And Reflect type could be potentially pretty good, like with anything that learns it, because that's no one expects that or knows how to deal with that. Or sorry, Gengar learns it, but I want to show you who else gets it. Just Gengar and Toedscruel. So if Toedscruel uses Reflect type, it would actually have pretty good typing if you did it on the right Pokemon. Even though I think it might have -1 priority, so it might be better with Gengar. But I don't know if that would be worth it because you have almost no bulk. So if you make it immune to something, then it's worth it. Like if they're trying to hit you with a psychic move and you copy their dark type, one of their dark type allies, then it could be worth it. It just depends. But is it really underrated? Probably not. Especially with only 2 Pokemon learning it and one not being very bulky and the other being, I think, -1 priority with it, possibly. Or just slow with it. And then Mortal Spin, that poisons both foes and does some damage, so that's pretty good. Solar Beam, well, I suppose in Series 2 it's not that underrated, but it kind of is for Torkoal versus Water Pokemon, Rock Pokemon. It could be, but I don't think it's that underrated because typically how I use Torkoal is I use my ally for the coverage. I don't lock myself into Solar Beam, especially with specs, maybe, but typically I just want to use fire moves with it. If I have to use Solar Beam, I probably messed up somewhere because you should only normally need Earth Power and a fire move. But it is still underrated because it's used so little. And then Heal Pulse is pretty decent too at healing your ally, keeping it alive. I think it's a little bit underrated, even though people normally use Pollen Puff for that. Nuzzle is good for paralyzing them. I don't know why it does that weird spacing. I'll just leave it. And it does damage, unlike Thunder Wave, and doesn't miss. Now Taunt, that shuts down so many strategies. It's just really slightly underrated. People do use it a lot, but it's probably not used enough. Because like no one's running Mental Herb, and you can taunt like anything to have a good effect almost. Manual, Electric, or Grassy, or Psychic Terrain. So probably manual electric terrain's the best for setting up your Quark Drive Pokemon, but that can backfire if they have Quark Drive Pokemon too. But you could at least use it for also getting rid of their Spore potential and other stuff, or just boosting up your electric moves, or both. And Rest is a good move. By the way, these, you can change their terrain. That's also why it's good. Rest with Lumchesta is pretty good. I mean, we saw that with the Chuppa team with the Dondozo. I was using stuff like that way before he used it, though. I was like, how come no one's using Rest Dondozo? It's really good. And other Pokemon, too, might use Rest Sleep Talk. Or Sleep Talk. Okay. Charm, Feather Dance, Eerie Impulse, all those moves that harshly lower their offense are pretty good. You can target the right Pokemon. Fling, Iron Ball. I was using that with King Ambit and Trick Room, and it was pretty powerful. And just having an Iron Ball alone helps you sweep with some Pokemon easier in Trick Room that aren't below 49 speed already, or just aren't that slow in general. Or you can use it to make slow Pokemon even slower, not speed a Moongus and Trick Room, and put offensive pressure on it. Entry hazards can be decent. I think they're underrated in the sense that if you set up a stealth rock, if they switch a bunch of times or only switch in one time with one of their Pokemon after you use it, that's 1/8 damage on average. It could be 25 or it could be even 50 or it could be lower than 1/8, but it'll be probably about 1/8. So every time they switch, it's 1/8. And if you can make sure that they're punished every time they switch, that could be pretty good. And toxic spikes though is probably better than like spikes or maybe it's hard to say if toxic spikes is better than stealth rock, but it probably is for VGC because typically um, if you're setting down entry hazards, they're not going to switch a lot in VGC compared to singles and necessarily if you already set up the entry hazards. But for toxic spikes, it's going to keep doing damage. They're likely to switch like once and then just stay in. They can't just keep switching every turn like singles. So it's just different. And then OHKO moves could be a good like last resort. If you're like in a pinch, you could just try to hit them with an OHKO move, or it's useful for things that you otherwise just can't kill without it, like a Dondozo or something. Eventually, you could kill it. So it really depends. But normally, I wouldn't recommend strategies like that. But sometimes I remember really filler slots like Choice Scarf Kyogre. I would sometimes run Sure Cold just to have an out. Possible out sometimes if I have bad luck. I can try to turn the game around by hitting a OHKO move. And then Torment, it's underrated, but it's not that underrated because they can just switch moves every other turn. But it does help shut them down, especially versus Tinkaton because they can only use Gigaton armor every other turn. And then Snarl with King Ambit. King Ambit learns Snarl. So it's possible that you could use it even though I've like never seen it. It's probably not super great, but it is an option. And then and by the way, Snarl's usually better though with faster Pokemon, but you might be able to get the speed advantage somehow and use it. Even with slow Pokemon, it's decent though. Just Snarl's just really good in general. Okay. Now, Super Fang, it can miss, unfortunately, but just doing 50% to them is really nice without needing any investment in offense. You could just use a really bulky Pokemon like Mousehold and Super Fang and do a decent amount of damage. And then Tidy Up, I'll have to test it more, but it's basically a Dragon Dance that also gets rid of the entry hazards and stuff. There might be something else I'm overlooking. I think that's the gist of it. So Mousehold may not be that bulky to use it, but in some cases you could set it up and I suppose use Pop Bomb and be really offensive and fast and finish something off. Baby Doll Eyes outspeeds most Pokemon because it has priority and lowers their attack. I don't think it's that great, but I should actually test it out eventually because it might be good with with the Flutter Mane Mousehold combo or something. But overall, I don't know. I don't think I would use Baby Doll Eyes, but since I've like never seen it, I would say it's underrated. But if it's used more than like 5% of the time, 10% of the time, then I'd say it's overrated. Okay, Copycat plus an ally's move. That might be underrated. I would have to see exactly how all that works. And then Detect over Protect. Detect is better against Imprison in general than Protect because Protect is way more common than Detect for the amount of Pokemon that get them. And then Trailblazer, Flame Charge, they do have low power, but raising speed could be pretty useful if you can get off an attack anyways. Um, so I would say underrated, but probably not that underrated usually. U-turn or Volt Switch. Oh yeah, by the way, Trailblaze might be good with like a Pokemon that gets Spore. So let's look at Trailblaze. If Brute Bonnet gets it. Yeah, Brute Bonnet gets Trailblaze, so that might be pretty good. because then you have high speed. And I almost want to say, where's the Braylon at? Braylon doesn't get it. This thing, I think, what is it, 117 speed it gets? Yeah. So after one Trailblaze, you would have like, what's 117 times 1.5? It's like 175 speed. So that would be pretty good for specifically for Brute Bonnet. And then and a few other Pokemon would be good with it too. And then U-turn or Volt Switch is really good in general, and Flip Turn, especially since Iron Bundle gets Flip Turn now. Well, I guess it always had it, but I mean we can use Iron Bundle now and use Flip Turn, not just the Palafin. And then some good Volt Switchers, lots of them, even if they're not super fast. But Kilowattrel actually might be underrated with it because it has so much speed. And you could keep Volt switching and trying to get into the Intimidate, switch around, try to cycle in till you get to Intimidate and get a boost. Wow, I didn't know Iron Treads gets it, but it wouldn't be that good with it because it has low special attack. Rotom it might be pretty decent with, and people even use it with Iron Hands. I don't know about that, maybe, because it has good bulk, and you can kind of let it take the hit before you switch to an ally. And then U-turn, there's probably better U-turners. Yeah, Dragapult outspeeds almost everything and can U-turn. Talonflame can U-turn, but I would usually just manually switch because U-turn doesn't do that much damage. But if you have a stab with it, like Scissor, it would be probably pretty good. But or with Meowscarada if you use it on the Choice Band set. But normally, unless it's you have a really filler move, I wouldn't use it. Sub. Sub can be pretty underrated, especially on mons that don't need a lot of moves to be effective. Like Sandy Shock, Sub might be pretty good on. It stops Spore, sets up on them if they have like protect. If they use protect, it also blocks Intimidate. So if you have it up before they send in their Intimidator, it blocks Intimidate. So there's a lot of good things about Sub. Then Mimic, like I was talking about, Copycat might be good. I would need to think about it more, but it seems underrated if like no one uses it, and it has a potential useful niche. And then what else? Weak priority move like even Quick Attack or Aqua Jet could be, yeah, just to finish off a Sash or if they have really low HP. And then Scale Shot is really underrated. It raises your speed, and I've been using it with loaded dice with Roaring Moon, but its main issue is it being 4 times weak to Fairy, and then some Pokemon resist that move or it misses or whatever, but overall it's a pretty good move because it raises speed unlike all the other multi-hit moves, even though it does lower your defense and already has low defense, but you can just kind of snowball with that sometimes and use Dragon Dance and then just sweep with Scale Shot, but it is a single target move. And then Leer is not used very much, but I believe two Pokemon get a Prankster Leer. At least two Pokemon get a Prankster Leer. Pretty sure. Doesn't Murkrow get it? No, Sableye and I don't even know how to pronounce this one. Garafai or Fi-Eye. Garafai gets it. I think people normally call it Giraffe-Eye or I don't know, whatever. It doesn't look like a giraffe though. And then, so it's really mostly just one useful mon. Knockoff with Sableye is pretty underrated because a lot of people just use Foul Play with it, especially in Series 2 when a lot of the Pokemon don't take high damage from Foul Play, as you could have seen in my other video. Then Knockoff's just a really good move in general. That's partly why Meowscarada is good, because they took off Knockoff on almost every Pokemon. There's only a few Pokemon that have it now. And then Screech can miss, but it's still underrated with something like Prankster. And let me see if we get Metal Sound too. Because you could use Metal Sound if Murkrow learns it with Prankster. Oh, Klefki. So you could use Klefki with Metal Sound, but isn't, I think Metal Sound has low. Metal Sound has low accuracy compared to Fake Tears. What was that other one I was talking about? Screech. Metal Sound. Fake Tears is better than Metal Sound because wait, Iron Moth, for example, Metal Sound. See, it lowers the specialty, but you could just use Fake Tears with Umbreon and have perfect accuracy. So Fake Tears with Prankster. I think Grimmsnarl gets it. Yeah, Grimmsnarl gets it. Like Grimmsnarl. Okay, a Lava Plume could be pretty underrated. You can use it, especially with a Flash Fire ally. Okay, mostly with a Flash Fire ally though, because you don't normally want to hit your ally with that, especially if it gets a burn if it's physical. And Overheat Torkoal. Overheat in general is really good. But especially with Torkoal, it's underrated because like no one uses it, but you can get a lot of one-shots if you use Charcoal or Specs with Overheat. And then Imprison Trick Room with certain mons like Indeedee or Bulky Frigg. There's not a lot of great Imprisoners. I will say that Indeedee to me is the best Imprison user because you can use it well besides just using it for Imprison, and you don't have to use a Trick Room team with it. You could just use it for Imprison to shut down the Trick Room teams and use it for redirection after that and stop them from using redirection. If you use another Imprison user, you're probably imprisoning moves that aren't as essential. Like, you won't be imprisoning Follow Me and whatnot with it. But Draft Rig would be pretty good still because you want an imprisoned user that's immune to Fake Out. They could fake you out with Mold Breaker Tinkaton, but that's pretty rare. And if they're using Mold Breaker, then you can just intimidate them. So, yeah. Priority Tailwind. Tailwind with Fleshender, Talonflame, and Murkrow. Those are like the only priority Tailwinds, as far as I know, unless you consider Fleshender's pre-Evo. Yeah, Fleshling. But you would never ever use that because why? When you could either use Fleshling, use Fleshender or Talonflame. Talonflame I would normally recommend over Fleshender, but I think Fleshender is still barely top tier because you can use Will-O-Wisp and Roost with it, and I did pretty well with it. Actually, I beat a Roaring Moon because I Will-O-Wisped him, and I had a lot of bulk with Eviolite and kept roosting away until he died, and kept Brave Birding roosting every now and then. You can get back to full HP and keep Brave Birding. And then Priority Tailwind. Yeah, I said that already. Priority Tailwind's really underrated. People think they can just use like a Tailwind with Mance or Kilowattrel, but then they get outsped by the Prankster one, and they may not be able to get it up. Like, what if you use it in back and they have an Iron Bundle in front, and you switch it in trying to get up a Tailwind, and then they just like kill you, or somehow two-shot you with them and their ally, and you never get it up. So I prefer a Priority Tailwind. I've done it really well with Murkrow, especially with Goldango or Talonflame, and I've done well with Fleshender as well, but it's different. I'd say you have to use it on a certain team and hope that Will-O-Wisp hits. And then Surf, especially with Pelipper, is really good. You can hit through the redirection, and it does a lot of spread damage. You can use Protect with your ally, or use Dry Skin or a water resistant ally or Storm Drain or something So it's really underrated. I've done pretty well with Surf. It doesn't miss. Hydro Pump misses, and it's just been really good to me. So it can be a liability though on your team, but I normally have used it with like Light Screen and Terra Water, Sylveon, or whatever, and it wasn't such a big deal. Even if I had to surf my own ally neutrally, I either had Light Screen up, or even if I didn't, sometimes it's worth it because you could super affect a Pokemon through Rage Powder, or just happen to super affect one, and they may not expect you to do that, or maybe they do, but then they can't really do anything about it, that high spread damage. So that's pretty much it for the underrated moves. There maybe are more, but these are most of them. So thanks for watching.